Welcome to another Field of Glory 2 and Field of Glory 2 Medieval Guide video. This time we're looking at a unit category, Bowmen. So these are massed, non-light units of archers or crossbowmen. They got some unique characteristics and they fall roughly into four types. So massed archers without close combat capability, massed crossbowmen without close combat capability, crossbowmen with, and bowmen with. Alright, so things about this class in general. They can't evade, so there's that, and many of them are unprotected, which you don't see very much with infantry. It makes them very squishy and vulnerable to missile fire themselves. They also suffer from a number of pretty bad cohesion penalties. You can look at the exact cohesion test penalties and the exact different missile weapon POAs in the manual, but basically these units shouldn't be losing in melee, especially in open ground. The penalties pile on fast for them. In addition, the units without a close combat capability, they get a pretty hefty malus when enemy non-light units with a melee capability are within 2 tiles of them, so charge range. So this is in the game for two reasons: one historical, one game balance wise. The historic rationalization is that these men are not equipped for close combat. They are packed too tightly together to evade, so the sight of the enemy getting close to them is cause for concern, which will affect the cohesion of the unit and the overall ability to shoot accurately. The gameplay explanation is in early patches before this was in, armies with massed archers just cleaned house against everyone, and it was a bit silly. So how does this work in practice? Well, here we have a unit at long range for our red archers. So 12 to 40. Here it's 14 to 44, but massed non-combat bowmen. With enemy close combat within 2 squares, minus 23%. The crossbowmen at long range are 10 to 32, and at close range are 16 to 50, because these crossbowmen are 50% swordsmen and don't suffer from that penalty. So, unlike with light archers, massed archers are often, if not better off, just as well off shooting at long range as at close range. So for example here, 12 to 40 long range. With the light archers, it's 4 to 18 on both, so a waste of arrows, especially because they can evade, right? You can roll up right next to the enemy and get that close range shooting. With massed archers, since you can't do that, you will often want to be shooting at distance. There are other special characteristics of bowmen. One thing is a not so nice thing. Any mounted unit, light or non-light, with or without a melee capability, in open terrain, gets an additional 100 impact against them for mounted versus bowmen. So here you've got a pretty expensive unit of longbowmen. It might drop cohesion against this trash cavalry. However, some of them do bring stakes. These, you don't really see them in multiplayer because they take a full turn to put down or pick up. So people are just not going to attack them in general. But if you do see them being used, they cover the 3 tiles to their front. So here, if we try to charge with these light lancers, no impact capabilities apply, because the lancer only applies in open terrain, and they do not get the plus 100 against bowmen in the open. Even though this remains an open ground tile, the fact that they're crossing an obstacle renders the combat non-open. One other special characteristic of stakes, they render well-armored and above infantry units as disordered when attacking across them. So if we attack in the open with these men-at-arms, it's pretty chunky, but if we attack across stakes, it's much lower. This is really kind of a hack that's in the game to get the balance okay in 100 Years War engagement, so you can't just roll up as a French with a bunch of men-at-arms and just crush everything in your path. Alright, what else? Well, what about hiding in terrain? Well, the problem with hiding in terrain with bowmen, so that would be like woods, marsh, difficult slope, is that it moderately disorders them. So that means that they've got a penalty for disorder, minus 22% in this case. There may be situations where that makes sense to do anyway. So here, charging into rough ground with these dismounted men at arms, it's moderate disorder, so the men at arms are still going to win pretty handily. In the woods, it's severe disorder. It's going to be a grind at best, and in the meantime, they're going to be vulnerable to attack from elsewhere. And they're grinding against a much, much, much cheaper unit. So this kind of terrain is good for massed archers if they're fighting heavier units that are otherwise going to get at them and run them over. If you're using your massed archers to protect your army against enemy skirmishers, well, one, crossbowmen aren't that good, at least against infantry skirmishers, but more importantly, yes, you get cover for shooting from the woods, but the disorder means you're kind of wasting your ammo. So it's a trade off. One more unit that's not present in medieval are the Spabar type in Ancients. So these are classed as bowmen, but they do have light spear impact in addition to swordsmen 50%. Light spear is listed at 50%, but it is functionally the same as 100% light spear. Also, as a quirk of unit costing, light spear is a free capability for non-light infantry units in fog. So this Barabara foot, so average protected bow, light spear 50%, swordsman 50%, costs 45 points, and these auxilia archers cost 42. The 3 point difference is for the 50% swordsmen. However, because these auxiliaries lack a melee capability, you can see they're getting hit with that penalty for close combat enemies, 12 to 38 kills, whereas the Sparbara are not hit by it, so 18 to 54. That said, do keep in mind the Sparbara, still being classed as bowmen, will get hit with that mounted versus bowmen in open terrain. So even light spear cavalry or chariots can cut them up on impact if they survive the arrow storm, which, to be fair, is unlikely given situations like this. Well, they hold firm, but they lost like a fifth of their number, cutting into their already bad combat strength modifier. All right, so how do you actually deploy these units? We could go through dozens of examples of different scenarios based on terrain, opponents, etc., etc. We'll just do a couple or a few basic ones. So, if I was facing, as this Crusader army, a horde of horse archers, like Mongols or something, and I felt that pushing out was not possible and I had to play for the draw, you could do something like this. You're anchoring your flank on rough ground. You've got spearmen in front, including armored spearmen to soak arrows and just be a wall, but with gaps in between them so that your men can shoot through. You've also got this hilltop. You can shoot directly over units to your front this way. Knights are in reserve, out of arrow range, but if a spearman is disrupted and gets charged, or disrupted, charge, and then the enemy comes through at your bowman, your knights can countercharge and bounce the enemy off, hopefully. This is very defensive. This is playing for a draw. This is a situation where you know that if you move forward, the enemy is just going to surround you and cut you to pieces. All right. But what if we were facing a more conventional, Latin Western style force? Infantry, knights, crossbowmen. Okay, in that kind of fight between two potentially pretty heavy forces in the open, there's a lot less scope for bowmen to be useful. Yes, if your opponent ends up camping, say like this hill, these enclosures, then you might wish you had more bowmen, right? If you realize when you've advanced up to here, having seized this enclosure with your own crossbowmen, that, oh shit, like I can't push this or force them to come down without more missile support. But to be honest, that's kind of a gamble too, that if you go hard into missiles to be able to try to contest terrain, potentially even something like this, although I would stay away. Well, what if he actually went really heavy and just hard into foot and knights? And, you're sitting there with a bunch of archers, then you'll need to redeploy rapidly. Or you might find that, you get a bunch of crossbowmen so that you can push terrain and you decide, well, I want to be safe and in terrain in case he goes hard into heavies. And then he sees that and realizes, oh, I can't push that. And then you've got yourself a draw, which isn't great if what you're trying to get is wins. So, as a kind of a balanced approach here, you can get some crossbowmen to take this enclosure where they excel, maybe take this rough ground, but in general, this is a force where missile troops, including bowmen, are a supporting arm, particularly working on the flanks where they can do severe damage to enemy cavalry and then hopefully be protected by your own cavalry. So yeah, that's a brief guide to bowmen. There's a lot more we could talk about, especially in terms of different matchups. But the important points are, they're really bad and open in terms of taking cohesion. They are uniquely vulnerable to cavalry charges, as cavalry gets that plus 100 against them in open terrain. And the variety without melee weapons, especially, you're fine to just shoot at long range because the penalty is going to make it pretty similar at close range against most enemies. So, the type without a close combat capability, these are kind of niche units that are useful, fighting behind a stream or on top of a hill or from rough ground against an army that doesn't have a lot of medium foot, something like that. In other circumstances, you're going to want to limit your numbers. The Spabar, they're kind of their own thing and they're only in the Persian list, so maybe I could have a separate guide about that. So let me know if you have questions below. I try to keep these brief so they're in like comprehensible bite-sized chunks. If you want them to be longer or more detailed, let me know. Till next time.